is Christina Rittenbach, and I'm the Extension Agent here in Stutsman County for the North Dakota State University Extension Service. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make an apple pie, and it's a healthy version of an apple pie. So this apple pie is going to have less fat and less sugar in it than your traditional apple pie. So we have just some flour and a little bit of sugar for the crust, and then we have some Granny Smith apples for the filling. The Granny Smith apples are going to be best for baking, and we are going to need about 6 cups of those. And then also to go into the apples, we have a mixture of 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. And then also for making the crust, I use 1/4 cup of vegetable oil. I usually use canola oil. And then I also have just a dish of cold water. I will be using about 3 to 6 tablespoons of water in the crust to make it moist. I am going to mix together the flour, and this is 1 3/4 cups flour, and also 1 1/2 teaspoons of sugar mixed in with the flour, and then mix in the 1/4 cup of canola oil. And you want to stir this up until the particles are about the size of small peas. And then to make the dough moist, we are just going to add some cold water, 1 tablespoon at a time. And you want to stir it in until it just about cleans the side of the bowl. You want to do 1 tablespoon at a time just to make sure that you don't get it too moist. Sometimes you may need to put in a little bit more water than what the recipe recommends. When you begin to form it into the crust, you just don't want it to be crumbly so that it doesn't stay together. So that was about 4 tablespoons like the recipe recommends. So then I just test it, kind of pinch it together. It is still a little bit crumbly for me. It might be kind of hard to roll out when it's that crumbly, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. Go. I'm going to try just forming it into a ball. If it still seems kind of dry, I can still add some water at this point. The bottom does still feel a little dry here, so I might just add a tiny bit more water to these bottom crumbles. And you want to just form your dough then into a ball. Once you have your dough in a ball, you will want to split it in half so that you have half of it for your bottom crust and half for your top crust. Doesn't need to be exactly half, but you want it to be close. Then you'll form your half into a ball and put it on a sheet of wax paper. And this is where we're going to roll out the dough. And put another sheet over top of it. And take your rolling pin and just roll it into a circle. Most pie recipes will say to roll it a couple of inches larger than the upside down pie plate. I'm going to be using a deep dish pie plate, and so that is going to be a little bit bigger than your standard one as far as depth. So instead of making it a couple inches larger than the side, I'm just going to try to bring it up to the top of the pie plate on the deep dish one. Using the wax paper is a good way to just help make sure that the pie crust doesn't stick to whatever you're rolling it on or to your rolling pin. If you didn't want to use wax paper, you could also just flour your rolling pin and flour the surface to make sure that it doesn't stick. Now you might see where you might get a little break here, a little split in your dough. Well, you can just fix that with your fingers. The most difficult thing in making an apple pie is the crust. Getting it to that right consistency can be tricky. Like I said, you want to make sure it's not too dry but not too wet. So I think a common problem is trying to figure out that happy medium with the moisture of the crust. Okay, now I'm just going to kind of test by seeing about how how big this is, and it is larger than the pie pan when I flip it upside down, so it should be good. So I can take off the top layer of wax paper and bring over my pie plate. And I'll just flip it upside down inside the pie plate. Adjust it within the plate to make sure it's centered. And when you're doing this, you just want to be gentle with it so that it doesn't tear. And if it does, that's okay, because you can usually just fix it with your fingers. Also, you want to push on the sides and the bottom of the pie pan to make sure that there isn't any air in between the crust and the dish. I kind of have a spot where there isn't really any crust right there. It's a low spot. It's okay to borrow some crust from other places where there might be a little bit excess and put it there just to fix that. And the bottom crust is ready. Okay, so now that we have the bottom crust finished, we'll start rolling out the top crust. You can just use the same pieces of wax paper that you used before. Form that top crust into a ball again. And we'll just do the same exact thing that we did with the bottom crust. Okay, now that we have the top crust rolled out, I'm just going to set this aside and work on the apples. I already have most of the apples cut to save time, and as I cut them, I toss them in with about 1/4 cup of unsweetened apple juice, and this is just to make sure the apples don't get too brown while they're sitting and waiting to be put in the pie. Now that the apples are all cut, I'm going to mix in the combination of 1 tablespoon cornstarch, 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, and 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. And you just want to mix it up until all the apples are coated. Okay, now the apples are all coated, so it's time to pour them into the crust. And I'm just going to make sure I get the juice all in there as well. I did cut up a few too many apples, and so if you do that, you can use them in other ways. You could just eat them raw if you wanted, or bake them up and have some baked apples. Now we're going to take the top crust and put it over top of the apples. And then you want to fold down the edges and attach them to the edge of the bottom crust. And this is how you can make your crust edge. And again, if you have a little bit too much in one spot and not quite enough in the other, you can take that off and do a little patchwork with your crust. You want to just cut a few slits in the top of the pie, and the slits will just allow some of that air to get through, and it can also help when you are baking it to know when it's about done. The juice will begin to bubble through the slits when it's ready to go. Before you put it in the oven, you'll want to use something like this, which is just an aluminum ring to go over the crust, or you could make your own with aluminum foil. And you just want to put it around the edge of the crust to keep it from browning too much while it's in the oven. And then we're going to take this off the last 10 to 15 minutes of baking. And it's ready to go in the oven. Okay, and we're going to bake it for 40 to 50 minutes at 425 degrees. And the crust is just starting to brown, and so we know that it's good and done. Making a good apple pie might seem like it is a little bit difficult, but if you just follow the simple, easy steps, you'll have a nice, healthy apple pie for Thanksgiving in no